You're watching Hearthstone Grandmasters, and our first match coming up now is going to be tom60229 up against Tiz. Oh, no, wait, it's not. By some absolute miracle, it's going to be Tom versus Shaxy with an insane victory clutched from the jaws of defeat at the end of the last series there. Shaxy somehow manages to scrape his way through to the winner's bracket match. And based on some of the things that happened in that series, I'm going to go ahead and say that Tom is going to have to try pretty hard to be taking the win against Shaxy.
I mean, that Demon Hunter game from Shaxy absolutely blew my mind. At first, I was looking at the newer list of the Soul Demon Hunter that had the Glaive Bound Adepts, but then thinking how that deck is so aggressive to begin with, I wonder if Shaxy's way of going about it with that early package of one-drops that Tempo Demon Hunter has, is there a whole new archetype potentially budding out because of this? Remains to be seen, but I will no longer estimate the damage output from this deck whatsoever. What I do know is that we are starting with the mutual warrior bans once again. That definitely seems like the class that has drawn the most respect from the Asia Pacific players this week.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think that is reflected across all the regions here, because not only does it have a very nice shot against all of the aggro decks, obviously with the armor gain, risky skipper, all of that general stuff that you've come to know and hate. It also has the very powerful bomb package, especially in some of the European versions of the deck that we're seeing from Casey and Bunny Hopper in particular, where they're running Captain Greenskin, Krastinov, double upgrade, all the bombs that you could ever want shuffled into your opponent's deck. Makes it so it's very, very strong against also the slower control matchups as well. So I think it's a very, very nice ban from all the players.
What we're starting with, though, is the Priest matchup versus Soul Demon Hunter from Tom. One that we saw played very well by Tiz on the Soul Demon Hunter end last series. Gonna go a little bit different here because Shaxy's list is once again not conventional whatsoever. He has the double wild pyromancers in there.
Yeah, it's not the version of the list that I have played too much of, or I have to be honest, not the version of the list that I'm overly fond of. I think the Highlander version has a lot to offer. And I kind of just like the version that has the Disciples of Galakron in there, Fate Weavers as well, just so you can actually get some punch onto the board at the start. But at the very least, one thing that has been shown is the power of Wandmaker and Cobalt Spellkin at the moment. I can understand why Shaxy has taken to putting them in his decks.
Pretty expensive choices from the dragons that he gets, but at the very least, he discounts the Cobalt Spellkin play next turn because Shaxy's hand was looking very, very slow there. The Illusion, not something you want to play this early, especially since he would be giving Tom a bunch of zero-cost spells, and the Forbidden Words is not really getting a good enough target. I think Shaxy values it higher than just dealing with a Spirit Jailer.
So what we've been talking about in this matchup with the Control Demon Hunter against the Priest that we seem to be seeing a lot at the moment is the necessity to get the board on lock, which I think Shaxy, more than anyone else, almost to a fault, you could argue, has shown good understanding of in the matchup. He's been consistently playing with a Tempo route, even going so far as to throw out Apotheosis, to throw out the Renews, purely to stick board control. And while he hasn't had too much opportunity to do that right at the start, now with the Cobalt Spellkin, things look like they may be starting to turn around.
Tom has a great answer, though, with the Soul Shear Twin Slice. Can even fit in second Spirit Jailer here. Looks like he's just going to trade the first one in Hero Power instead. Doesn't value that 1-3 very highly, which I think is fair. Twin Slice is especially useful when he has the Eldraki War Blades plus Blade Dance in hand to just save for a larger board. The pickup of Double Jump is something you don't see very often, but the only Outcast card in the deck, I believe, is the Double Skulls of Gul'dan. Oh, Tom has one copy of Eye Beam as well.
Yeah. Which is great, you know, throwing that down on turn 7, it's a long ways off, of course. But that can be very crucial to get the damage in, because one thing that we've seen is, even though the Priest locking down the board early on is their best chance of winning the game, it often doesn't directly end the game. It just sets them up for a strong end game. So the likelihood of reaching turn 7, 8, 9, even as far as like 15, I think is very high.
Taking another look at the list, there's also double Spectral Sights there for Tom.
Right.
So the double jump usage, I think as long as Tom plays it when he has 6 mana remaining, it's just covering all his bases to make sure that he can outcast the Skull if that's the one he gets immediately. But he's going to go for it here because I guess he was thinking the alternate plays are not good enough. Rips the Spectral Sight, probably the better outcome for him here, and makes great use of his mana for the turn.
Yeah, works out fantastically, and also looks like he's lining it up to the face, which we were talking about the necessity on the priest side to lock down the board. One thing we haven't been talking about quite so much is the necessity for the Demon Hunter to hit your opponent in the face every single turn.
And while this does seem very central to their game plan, it did look threatening in the face of Apotheosis sticking, but I believe Tom, with his hand full of AoE, essentially with the Shard Shatter Mystic and the Blade Dance, didn't want to spend any additional damage dealing with minions that get caught by the Shard Shatter anyway. And he's not going to deal with Cobalt Spellkin either.
I think it's great.
Even if this gets apotheosized, he can just go for Twin Slices, Blade Dance to deal with it anyway.
That's the kicker, isn't it? It's perfectly showing how you want to approach the matchup. It's weapons go face, removal kills minions. That's just how you play it.
Very clean from Tom here. Shaxy, however, grasping for ways to heal back up or at least put a taunt away, but everything's too expensive. Best he can do is copy that Cobalt Spellkin, I suppose.
That's what I'm looking at. The alternative, of course, being if he wants to fit in the heal, he could go Wand Maker heal in a fire, which is definitely not bad. It does fit that quite necessary heal in.
It feels necessary, but it's also extremely slow.
Wow!
Shaxy rips this with 2 mana left.
What?
He can just use up this Twin Slice, but I don't know about that.
What was he looking for? He can't deny the Lapidaries. He can't deny the Glavebound Adepts either.
Pretty much just Twin Slice, I suppose.
Wow.
Seemed like a desperation play here. Gives Tom quite a few resources to play with, but not a good way to deal with these minions, at the very least. Wave of Apathy can make it so that they're neutralized for the most part.
And this is the thinking, I guess, behind Shaxy's play. It isn't so much what can I steal from my opponent, it's what can I deny from them on this turn, which is the board clears, getting rid of Blade Dance, Magtheridon, Shard Shatter, whatever it may be, to clear things off, is completely destroyed now.
But he's not sticking enough damage to deal the lethal, and then he would just give Tom back the hand. Not sure. From Tom's perspective, though, playing an individual minion seems really bad because Shaxy will get back Galakron. If he wanted to go for Wave of Apathy, then he's not really developing much either. Huh?
Why would you play Raised Dead?
Yeah, it's just gonna go back to Shaxy's hand. The minion.
It means that he gets back Demon Hunter cards instead of Cobalt Spellkins, but that's really not a big deal, I think.
Yeah, and the Elucia hadn't died by that point either, so there is no risk of giving that back to Shaxy. I'm very confused.
Does mean it denies Wand Maker, I suppose, as well, and he might have been afraid of generating Renews or Radiance.
Okay.
So it does arguably deny some heal, but I agree with you. I think you don't want to be giving your opponent the ability to just
however,
not have to spend the health.
There was also just a Wand Maker in the hand there. Of course, he couldn't have played it with the Kron, but it felt unnecessary, but all of these Elucia turns, I feel people just think about completely different things, and they're all valid.
The important thing for Shaxy, though, is that he now has information with this Elucia play, having used up the Twin Slice, that there isn't really a good clear or so powerful of a clear with the Blade Dance. Although, having said that, actually, yes, there is, with just Shard Shatter plus Blade Dance on the same turn. It's actually a perfect clear.
Makes things nice and simple for Tom. He has given up his 1 damage hero power every turn, which feels pretty relevant, not gonna lie. It's outpaced by the Priest hero power, but
Yeah.
it's cheaper also. And if you're gonna force Shaxy into spending 2 mana every turn to heal up, that's a bit awkward. How many Lucias can one Demon Hunter play?
Yeah, it's starting to get a little bit ridiculous.
Okay, well, Shaxy does find a safe window to get down this taunt. Nice and clean. And Tom should know the majority of what's left in Shaxy's hand as well, if he's been keeping perfect track.
Skull we like. That is a very, very big draw for Tom to find.
Twin Slice as well.
Whoa! He needs the old hero power!
I mean, he can just hold on to this for this turn. I like the look of setting up the Frozen Shadow Weaver. Could potentially go face next turn.
Okay, yeah.
Because he can go next turn Twin Slice, Blade Dance, Eye Beam to deal with this, even though it's pretty expensive.
Good point.
Any other minions played are likely to die to the Blade Dance.
Oh, now Shaxy needs to like try and generate Holy Ripple, which could go with a discounted Malagos with the Draconic Studies as well. I'm looking at the nutty combos already. I want to see it.
If nothing else, Priest does make you think creatively.
That's one way of putting it. Oh, double discount.
And the Reborn on the Skeletal Dragon is pretty annoying for Tom, honestly.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So he could just treat this as a Sethic turn. Not the biggest one ever, but he also has 2 Wave of Apathy. I don't mind just using it to deny 3 damage from Tom. 3 Wave of Apathy.
Yeah, I like it a lot. The important thing is, of course, that it can still be used to chunk through the Reborn effect on the Dragon here, which is an absolutely massive deal. He can then get 8 damage through to the face, which otherwise just wouldn't exist. Wait, make that even more! Whoa.
Lapidary makes things so clean for Tom now.
Is this the Elucia turn? Could he have gotten away with it there? Gone Twin Slice Elucia to give Shaxy all of this? He would have been able to get Militia, I guess. Oh, it's complicated.
Yeah, I don't think he needed to go for it quite yet.
Okay.
Holding on to the Twin Slices on Draki Ward, even without the natural hero power, it is 7 damage in hand. And Shaxy only has his hero power to heal at the moment.
Right. So are we looking at anything other than just Study's Soul Mirror heal? He's got to get that heal in. There's still quite a lot of damage in Tom's deck.
Looks like it. Do we know of any dragons that can heal him indirectly? Not that Priest can discover.
Yeah.
And so it looks to just be survive this turn and hope you can pop off with Sethic on the follow-up.
Yeah.
Shaking his head.
Yeah, he knows this isn't the way the game plan is supposed to go. He lost the board control at the start, and therefore everything is just falling apart.
He's instead gonna prioritize getting a minion down here. Look, oh, okay. I thought he was gonna go for a Twin Tyrant, Wave of Apathy, but he wanted to get the heal as well. That's gonna be GG with the 2 minions still on board. Is this just being Oh wait, it was one short.
It's only 8. It's only 8 because he doesn't have hero power.
Right. Oh.
That falls
These
into the
damn
50% of
Galacron
times.
Demon Hunters.
Yeah, that's half the time where we're wrong at that Tom's.
Did put that disclaimer out there in the beginning. Thanks, Derek.
But he now has Apotheosis plus Soul Mirror, which allows him to gain 6 health and clear most of the board.
Okay, yeah, on the Frozen Shadow Weaver.
Right.
So it becomes a 6/6. kills itself off.
Or he can
Volterra
go
remains.
Twin Tyrant plus Apotheosis. If he plays it fast enough, maybe that'll give him the heal. But maybe not.
I mean, there's consideration for Twin Tyrant. Hope it snipes the 2 smaller minions and then just buff your taunt minion there. Oh, sorry.
Well, it doesn't have taunt.
Yeah. This is me just putting taunt on every dragon. Mage Scribe.
Indeed.
Everything is an explorer now.
11 health. 8 damage available on this turn. All the soul fragments, literally every single one, I think, being drawn there from his deck, making for a useless sociologist.
Yeah, that is painful. I wonder if that was meant to be an Illucia turn then. If Tom just, say, cashes in this Twin Slices and the Ooze, he goes Illucia and then has 7 mana to work with.
Maybe.
Gives Shaxy a useless Militia.
I mean, he could still go for it now, at the end of his turn. I don't hate that at all.
And then that would give Shaxy just no good options.
Nothing,
except
right? Yeah.
for the top deck. Okay.
You go Twin Slice, Illucia.
But he's still holding on to it. However, this board does get cleaned up by trade Pyro double wave.
Yeah, it does.
And then he can still play a dragon
He
afterward.
can play the Drake. That's a pretty big deal.
It really is. Is Shaxy just coming back into this? I mean, Tom can respond with Natalie, and that's pretty problematic, but it would just leave a 7-drop for Shaxy as well if he plays the Proto Drake. If it's Twin Tyrant though, the Natalie
Shaxy, I think, thinking of holding on to the wave of apathy for another turn to be able to clear up whatever comes down, or stall for another turn, I should say. Just tempting.
He's
it's only
just
gaining
thinking
him 1 life.
What damage cutoffs does he avoid by getting rid of 1 damage?
Right.
There is Twin Slice plus. Oh my
Plus
gosh!
that.
This exactly.
Plus
I was
exactly that.
Oh my gosh. I was thinking about Glaive-bound Adept, but if there's 1 Twin Slice, there's also Second Slice, and he would have died anyway. But against exactly 2 damage, whether it's from Chaos Strike or Aldraki Warblades, that would have dealt the lethal blow there. And even though the endgame got kind of wonky and we were looking at Illucia turns, Tom managed to scrape together damage.
Yeah, you of course have to consider that Tom, in playing Illucia, would give 1 draw from the top of his deck to Shaxy at that turn, which could be a powerful damage card, which Shaxy can use purely to get it out of Tom's hand on the following turn. Obviously, Illucia starts to mess with your mind somewhat when you play with it enough. But I do think the overall strongest play there was just to give his very weak hand to Shaxy on the following turn and rely on that board to stick in play and make it very, very difficult for Shaxy to respond. But even with that out of the way, it still does mean that Tom, in the matches played so far today, is 4-0 with his Demon Hunter, potentially looking at another sweep here.
It was very, very impressive indeed. Shaxy, however, managed to take a win versus this type of Demon Hunter with his own very special blend of Tempo and Soul Demon Hunter. I wonder if he'll be able to repeat that performance. We didn't get the chance to see Shaxy's preference of queuing into that when he had both Druid and Demon Hunter to choose from.
Right.
Last time he had Demon Hunter to choose from.
Yes, it was a little bit different of a scenario. I have to imagine that Shaxy is instead going to be going for the Druid over the Demon Hunter, because if we think back right to the start of Demon Hunter, just after Ashes of Outlands had been released, even though we all remember the aggro version that was so overpoweringly strong, there was a while where people were playing, I think it was Shao T who originally came up with the list of the combo variant with Kael'thas, which kind of just destroyed the aggro version, to be perfectly honest. You had all the heal, and you, of course, had huge amounts of damage that you could go for at the end. It's a different deck now, of course. It's not a true combo. It's just kind of damage that you're pushing to the face each turn. But I think the general principle will remain the same, that the control version of the deck should have a slightly better matchup against the aggro.
And also, this druid just has a lot of potential to get minions that are too big for Demon Hunter to deal with, or rather the Soul Demon Hunter.
Great point.
Shaxy starting off with a decent hand.
Job's done.
Which, if you see ramp and guardian animals, that's already pretty good for Druid.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. Even finding the Lake Thresher is really not that bad at all, because he just wants to guarantee himself the ability to find the Twilight Runners, of course, as soon as possible.
Wow, Tom even coining out this ooze shows you how much he prioritizes getting damage in the early game. He saw Spirit Jailer as a possible play into ooze, but Tom is going instead for the 3-2 immediately into Spectral Sight Curve.
And although this presents an interesting opportunity for Shaxy, where he could go Nature Studies to find Crystal Power or Wrath, or I guess any of the early removal spells available, I want to see him save it, go Wild Growth on here to go up to turn 5, and then play the Nature Studies on turn 5 to get the Guardian Animals 1 turn earlier.
Yeah, I definitely like the sound of that. You could just use the Nature Studies as a pseudo preloaded Innervate.
Yes.
And instead, he's actually face tanking this ooze, which makes me think Wild Growth next turn is not on his mind, actually.
I mean, it could be setting up for Wild Growth on 3 and then swipe face plus Nature Studies, but in the end, he agrees. He's just double tanking.
I mean, if you're double tanking and you leave the ooze up for an extra turn, I feel that it's taking more damage than it's worth.
Right.
And by the time you get the payoff of the Wild Growth, there's got to be a way to deal with the ooze instead of your hero power. But I am very confused. Although I suppose he can still just Wild Growth and Nature Studies this turn and it works out similarly.
It comes down on the same turn overall, doesn't it?
Huh.
What a cool line.
Didn't see that, honestly.
Yeah. It's still not even necessarily the correct way to go, because there's argument that you could just leave it on board and not really worry about tanking it. But I think actually, now that I've seen it in action, that was a really smart line from Shaxy that I personally wouldn't have found.
Yeah, or would have taken me ages to figure out how the math works there.
Yes.
In any case, he does get down the first round of animals. Hitting Twilight Runner is always good to help that cycle keep going. But Tom, in the meantime, because that ooze has connected so many times, he just is threatening a 2-turn lethal. Look.
It seems ridiculous to even say, but you're right. He's right knocking on the door of lethal already.
Shaxy's list does not have Crystal Power, has only 1 Overflow. This just looks like a replay of the first series Tom played.
Disgusting. If there's one thing that Tom knows absolutely about this deck, it is hit your opponent in the face.
Okay, it's not quite the 2-turn, because next turn he can put out just 7. I mean, I say just 7, but how is Shaxy going to race him at this point?
Well,
answer is he's going to survive potentially with that hidden Oasis pick.
Right, hidden being the operative word there. Tom, I think, is not necessarily all in, but at the moment definitely banking on the idea that he can just kill his opponent in the next 2 or 3 turns, which on average, yes, you will be able to, given Shaxy's list that's very low on healing.
Been a long time since I've seen this card be effective. Could have sworn it also summons a 6/6 here. But this is, of course, not Quest Druid. And Shaxy can develop the Omu if he wants as well. I'm gonna take the draw first.
He's got to be careful, right?
He's kind of at a crossroads of whether he believes the Omu will give him that much more value than the tempo it does right now. Because if he just spends the turn healing for 12 and not developing anything, assuming Tom has more damage in hand, which is very likely with the glaive bounds and other weapons, then Shaxy's still in the same problem, right? I feel like he needs to put more pressure on board to make it so that Tom might spend a turn removing instead.
I tend to agree with you, because the difference of getting 4 instead of 3 minions on board to play around Blade Dance is a big deal. And in addition to that, he also still doesn't have Germination in hand, he doesn't have Malagos in hand, he doesn't have Geppetto to draw the 1-cost minions. Omu is not popping off in any sense of the word at this point.
Well, he was just gonna end up with 3 minions there.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. Sorry. I was in Quest Druid world still anyway.
I know, right? This thing summons a 6/6. It really does.
But the salient point, I think, still stands there of Omo is not getting really the job done here quite yet.
And for Tom, with the Eldraki, it's very reasonable to assume that he could just heal back up anyway.
Impatient.
However, these skulls are stuck in a very awkward position for Tom, and while he wants to equip Marrow Slicer, he doesn't necessarily want to override the 2 damage right now.
I'm gonna win big.
Starting by digging for a Blade Dance, perhaps?
Those are all great options, it's got to be said.
I'm always looking at Chaos Strike just because it does half of what Spectral Sight does, but also gets him more damage. But going for the one I was least expecting. So what specifically does Mana Burn shut off here? Shaxy's still gonna have 7 mana going into this turn.
It's hard, I think, to talk about specifically what it shuts off because of how fluid Druid can be. With the mana, obviously, with Lightning Bloom and Innovate as well. It's just like, maybe you can play around a crazy Geppetto turn, maybe you can play around Lethal, which is Malygos double Moonfire here would be lethal with the Twilight Runner as well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize how close Tom was to dying there.
Yeah.
Not many ways to buff that Eldraki Warblades outside of the second slice. So Tom's HP was a little bit in question.
It could just be Vate, Lightning Bloom, attack, and try and find Malygos. He's close to it even without Malygos. He only needs 2 extra damage. Or 1 extra damage.
And he can still do that with the Omu in hand. But it's not
still do it.
Yeah, if he gets that right off the top, he can still go double Lightning Bloom, Omu, but then he'd have to Moonfire first to get the spell burst. Oh, I mean, you can see where Shaxy's head at. That's what's important. And Tom is still not looking at lethal at the moment.
Whereas Shaxy, with no extra help, is looking at lethal on the next turn with Swipe Moonfire, which is why Tom very, very swiftly puts an end to the notion that Shaxy will be able to get lethal in that way. He is going to need a little bit of extra help, but not much, it's got to be said.
Yeah. I mean, this Twilight Runner can connect face once more. There are 9 cards left in Shaxy's deck. He's looking for Geppetto or Malygos.
So
but he's got to jump a mid. So you start with Omu.
I was looking at starting with Swipe and then go Omu. I guess this works. You can just go Omu, Swipe, go up to 10 mana.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, this works. Still looking at lethal with Malygos. That's the important factor here.
That would be pretty crazy if it happens.
Oh,
he wraps
it! That was a bit more like it from Shaxy. Finally getting to see the power of Malygos Druid when compared to a lot of the other lists that have been nerfed by Kael'thas. That is how you turn a potential and another 3-0 sweep from Tom completely right around.
And it's all the legacy of that curve that he went for, of the hero powers and then the wild growth on the nature studies and the same turn. He tanked a lot of damage there, but the game plan was in clear sight of Shaxy, and he also took that hidden O's relatively early, and that was really what threw the wrench in all of Tom's plans. I have to say, that match was just a showcase of Shaxy.
It really was, and it also begs the question as to Tom's game plan, because absolutely the thought process was consistent. It was play your biggest minion every turn, the Coin Ooze, and then just the Shard Shatter Mystic purely for another kind of Bloodfen Raptor, just to get something onto the board to keep hitting face on turn 3. But we could have seen an alternate line where he played his 1-drop on 1. Imagine something so ridiculous. And then follow up with plays like Coin Soul Shard Lapidary instead. 2 completely different lines that could have been taken, which maybe would have resulted in a win. It's hard to say.
It's tough to say. I think overall, I still would have played similarly to Tom, and you cannot account for Hidden Oasis a lot of the time there. But honestly, I think Shaxy just played out of his mind.
I agree. Very, very nicely done there.
We are going to see for the first time, though, Tom's featured deck of the Zoo Warlock, and that's a Dark Lair off the top.
Yep, that is absolutely what you want to be seeing right out the gate. That card, whenever you take damage, you gain back mana crystals equal to that damage, up to a maximum of your current total mana crystals. So you refill them, I suppose, is a better way to say it. And what it means is that you can basically start to pop off with Flame Imp, the tap, all this nonsense that leads you to ridiculously powerful turns.
So I think Dark Lair refreshes 2 mana crystals equal to the damage.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah. But it's still a lot of the time enough to get the work done. You can fit in the free taps. You can just pop off when you get the synergy with the diseased vultures as well. And of course, you're still running the Hand of Gul'dan engine. However, Tom did not necessarily have a guaranteed way to discard it without the expired merchants. He takes a nice 2 and 3 though. That's a very good spot to make his hand just a lot more fluid.
Yeah, absolutely the way to go about it, to try and get this ball rolling as quick as possible, which he is going to have to do because Shaxy's hand is, without the payoff quite yet, but incredibly powerful with all this ramp that he's gained.
Yes, indeed. He can even choose to preload that Twilight Runner if he likes, because the Overgrowth is unlocking anything too impactful. Nefer set that turn. Shaxy is definitely smelling the threat of Dark Lair coming down. Nothing dead yet for Tom, so he can't quite use Raise Dead.
Oh my god.
Oh, man.
This is absolutely absurd mana cheat. And with Expired Merchant discarding Hand of Gul'dan as well to keep the hand economy high.
And the Cult Neophyte can come down at the end of all of this, which is pretty huge. To shut down Shaxy's follow-up plays, or at least make them a lot more awkward. Tour Guide and Hero Power get another 2 mana for free. Who said Druid cheats mana the best in Hearthstone?
This is absolutely disgusting. Even with the Twilight Runner cheated out early, ready to come in quick, it's still not enough to fight back. Lake Thresher here. There's a 4/6. What is that even going to be doing? Tom can just chew through that, Raise Dead to pull everything back again. It's disgusting.
Does he have to bees to get rid of both the Nefer set and the Dark Lair? Oh, I hate the sound of that. I really do. I think he does have to set up the Lake Thresher. At least if Tom chews through it, it's potentially damage that doesn't go to his face. But if the play is just remove 2 minions and then he sets up the Lake Thresher, it's just taking more damage in the long run, right?
I mean, this is the problem of not running a list with Animated Broomstick, because it doesn't get any better. It's never going to have Rush this game, and it is very likely to just be chewed up no matter what you do.
In any case, starting with the Twilight Runner draws makes sense. If he goes Overgrowth this turn, he'll have 8 mana to work with. It's not really giving him anything defensive in terms of options next turn. I'm still looking at the Lake Thresher.
Oh, and not killing off the Nefer set just means that Tom can just go absolutely bananas. A second Raise Dead as well. He can resurrect the Dark Lair. He can resurrect the... What do you even go for here? I guess Merchant. Yeah, he can play Dark Glare, Merchant, discard another Hand of Gul'dan that was discarded by the Merchant in the first place.
I think I'm content to just watch the fireworks go off here. Alright. Dark Lair, then the Nefer set can go face. He goes back to a full 5 mana. He can play his Merchant as soon as there's already board space. another 3 cards. We're gonna see at the very least 1 Flesh Giant come down at the end of this, I would have
Surely.
to assume.
Yeah. I mean, even if it doesn't, getting down the Neophyte is insane in its own right.
Have you ever seen 3 Dark Glares on one board? It could happen if you wanted to raise that there. But with not enough time remaining, I don't fault Tom whatsoever for just going for all but a victorious board anyway.
So the only hope for Shaxy is that he survives the turn, and then the Nephesets deal so much damage that he can cheese a Malagos lethal if he gets Lightning Bloom and Malagos. It's too many cards that need to come down all at once.
He's at 15, Dara.
Yeah.
There's a lot of damage on board. He is not surviving. Bees can get rid of a Dark Glare. Even then, he has to Moonfire just to not be dead on board.
Mm-hmm.
And that is still 14 on the board in a list that has Soulfires. It was an ambitious dream, but sometimes Zoo just does this.
It's what you have to do with the deck. I feel like if you don't do this, you are just going to be losing, but when you do it, it looks absolutely unbeatable. I mean, what could possibly stand up to the might of this Zoo deck as Tom takes a win and goes up 2-1. Given that this is last hero standing as well, he of course can queue it up again. And with Shaxy only having one final option to be able to try and take back a win, it is not looking good.
Yep, it's gonna be very, very difficult indeed. This is the deck we featured at the beginning of the day. Tom, the only one in APAC bringing it, but there are some lists over in Europe that have this Pain Zoo as well. Maybe in Americas as well. Didn't get the chance to check over all of their deck lists, but so far, Tom has taken 5 wins and 2 losses with that Zoo so far. It doesn't appear to be a deck that Tom queues very often, but if I'm looking at it in the perspective of last hero standing, I'd have to assume this is a counter queue into Priests more often than Druid, but it does get a lot of work done against Druid. It doesn't pop off before Guardian Animals.
Yeah, I think counter queue against Druid and Priest, that's 2 of the most popular decks, and if you're banning Warrior as your strategy, that's kind of the 3 most popular decks, broadly speaking, already dealt with just by merit of bringing this Zoo. Obviously, there's a very big fail state with the deck. It's not like you're 100% against Priest, 100% against Druid. It can, of course, go wrong. But I'd have to imagine, against the Demon Hunter here, it's going to be a close one. There is the ability for Shaxy, of course, to lock down the board with his own tempo spells, Twin Slice, Umberwing being a big deal as well. And all the damage that Tom is going to be dealing to himself becomes a lot more relevant in this matchup.
Yes, it can very quickly turn into a race, and Tom has to be a little bit more cautious, I suppose, of his health total. That's the case with certain hands, but certain Zoo draws do just tend to hand it, I believe, an auto win. I would say Tom's previous draw was very similar to that. If you can just set up a board that is too insurmountable, there are very few classes that can deal with that if it comes down around the 5-mana turn. Warrior's one of them with Brawl. But for Demon Hunter, they also need to have a very specific hand. If it's Dark Glares and Nephesset Thrashers, just the one Shatter Shard Mystic will not be enough either.
Yeah, of course. I mean, from Shaxy, it's the aggro version anyway, as opposed to the control version. So I think for him here, it's going to be arguably even harder because he can't move, but there's the very real threat of just getting underneath everything that the Zoo is doing. You know, if they play a Nephesset Thrasher and want to hit you in the face every turn, they're taking almost as much damage they're dealing to you straight back themselves, which is where you just go Twin Slice, Marrow Slicer, Soul Shard, Lapidary, hit them in the face, and hope that that will be able to get the job done. And I have to imagine that's got to be Shaxy's main course of action in the matchup.
In short, we're up for yet another very APAC matchup in terms of how fast and explosive it can go, and I am very, very happy about that. One thing I'll note, though, is you brought up the importance of Broom in Druid lists recently, which it was not there for Shaxy, so it was not an available out to be paired with the Lake Thresher. For Tom, though, it's actually there in his Zoo list, so if we do see Shaxy go off with a bunch of minions, it's not that Tom has 0 ways to respond even with no board. There's a chance that if he can pop off and trade in the same turns, that counts as a comeback mechanism.
That's a great point. It does have a deceptive amount of reactability or reactiveness, don't know what the English word is there, in Tom's Zoo Warlock deck, because there's Guardian Orc Merchant, which against a deck that's full of small minions can function as a kind of elven archer just to snipe off those small threats. Obviously, Nightshade Matron can be incredibly powerful, Broomstick as well. It can fight back against a losing board state, but it's got to be said that still the core of the deck is that you want to get on board, get down the Dark Glare, cheat out mana as soon as you possibly can. And that is his best way of fighting back against the Demon Hunter, which of course leads to the kind of classic conundrum that you have in these aggro matchups of whoever goes first feels like they're in a pretty good spot right from the get-go.
And while we saw last game that Dark Lair is the card that makes the whole deck function smoothly, this Warlock was facing off against Druid a while ago, where if you play Dark Lair on curve, it's not likely to be answered immediately. It would have to take Bogbeam Moonfire or just a combination of card and hero power. However, against Demon Hunter, you'd have to be a lot more cautious about how you time the Dark Lair. If it just comes down by itself on board, it can get answered by Twin Slices. So I feel that Tom has to be not necessarily as safe in the matchup, and he'd be more likely to play down 1-drops and not go all in on the Dark Lair game plan.
That makes sense. So I guess if he's finding the Voidwalkers, Tour Guides, Guardian, and Flame Imp, he I imagine would be holding on to them, because in the other matchups, Dark Glare is kind of all that you're looking to really pop off with, I feel like, most of the time, or a Hand of Gul'dan plus discard mechanic. But I absolutely agree with you. Locking down the board early on is very, very important in its own right. Even if Flame Imp, again, deals 3 damage to you, Raise Dead deals 3 damage to you, so does the Nephset Thrasher. It really does start to pile up. The other matchup I believe that we could, of course, be looking at if Shaxy is able to take the win is the aggro Demon Hunter up against Tom's Priest, the Highlander Priest, which I think is probably going to be a little bit tougher of a matchup, even if we did see Shaxy take down that exact matchup as the final game of the series in tremendous fashion against his.
Yeah, I think that the AoE from Priest would be very problematic. The very heavy 1-drop package that Shaxy is running, especially without the beaming sidekicks. The Wild Pyromancer in there for Tom's Highlander Priest could also present some problems. And just the ever-looming threat of Zephyrus into Resurrect Zephyrus and so on and so forth. Very excited to see how this exactly pans out. We're just waiting for Shaxy to lock in, but it's very likely that we are just going to see the Demon Hunter, I believe.
Yes, as his last remaining deck. It's only Tom, I believe, who has the access to switch over to his Priest if he loses here, given that this is, again, last hero standing. It's a little bit interesting taking a look at the matchups of each of these specific decks, because for Shaxy, even though he's very much going out on a limb here with the Tempo Demon Hunter, which he is the only player in APAC to do so, it was not rocking a positive win rate at the start of the day. So I wonder if come next week he will be switching over to a different strategy now that he's seen it in action a little bit more, or if he thinks it is still just well suited to the metagame.
Yeah, I mean, leave it to Shaxy to put his own spin on things, right? There is, I believe, some potential for a Tempo Demon Hunter still in the meta. I haven't seen it played with this Soul Shard Lapidary package, but if I think of it, Lapidary just seems to be old Glavebound Adept before Twin Slice was nerfed, because it can come down and be active on turn 5 a lot. And that was a big part of why that archetype was so consistent. We're looking at Shaxy's list. There's not even Glavebound in there anymore. Dari has all but taken its place. But I wonder that maybe he could be running Glavebound Adept instead of these Cobalt Spellkins just for even more consistent damage. That could be a way to take the deck forward, because a lot of the time you treat the Glavebound as a... I think there's potential in here, and I don't want to knock Shaxy's list just yet because it hasn't been performing too well. Maybe this is just the prototype for a new deck in the meta. At least that's what I'm hoping for.
Absolutely, and I think if there was any deck to stick double Wandmaker, double Cobalt Spellkin in, for me it's Demon Hunter, because the suite of 1-cost spells is so powerful at the moment. It's really Priest where I think that gets a bit more questionable, where he also has the double Wandmaker, double Spellkin. But it looks like we fixed everything. Everything is ready to go, and Shaxy, on his last legs here, has to take a win against the Zoo, which already has Gia, a Dark Glare, ready to go.
And it does have a Thrasher, but Tom's hand, he's on the play here. This makes it a straightforward to just go Thrasher, Dark Glare, and hope that sticks. Because even though the Thrasher is overstated for a 3-drop, if the Zoo player misses their 1-drop and then Demon Hunter just has 1 into 2, it's likely that the Neferset Thrasher actually gets cleared, and then the Dark Glare as a follow-up is lackluster. So we see Tom actually mull everything. I'm surprised to see the Dark Glare go, but not surprised to see the other ones.
It definitely lays out where his head is at in the matchup, which is I have to stick tempo right at the start. Got to lock down that board control, which does make sense. I agree. I wasn't sure if it would go so far as to get rid of the Dark Glare, which does feel like the beating heart of the deck for us. But maybe Tom is relying on the just kind of the zoo aspect of the deck, just getting down these big these small minions on curve as soon as he can.
We will concede that Tom absolutely knows more about Zoo than both of us combined,
yes.
for sure. But Shaxy started off with the right half of his deck for this matchup, running that late-end Marrow Slicer and Lapidary, but he hit Twin Slice as the Spirit Jailers, just minions that are of a shape that's very difficult for Tom to deal with. Tom even just playing down the Expired Merchant to not to duplicate the Flesh Giants, but to have board presence of some sort.
Yeah, the philosophy is what you don't want to hit, in my experience, in the matchup. That's where things start to go a little bit rocky in terms of the Wand Maker. But with Spirit Jailer in hand, it's still a reasonable card to pick up, even with Tom discarding a pretty important card in his hand for the next turn, actually.
I think Tom's play was revolving around sticking that Nightshade Matron. He was saying, I'm going to Soulfire a relatively small minion just to give myself the best chance, staying ahead on board in the next turn. It really relied on having that Matron with the Hand of Gul'dan to swing things back, but now the curve gets quite awkward indeed for Tom.
Shaxy does have to decide whether or not he wants this philosophy to do anything. He could have, of course, copied I believe the Spirit Jailer as well, and given it a buff, which would have been very powerful. Instead, he prefers the tempo of just getting a 1-3 on the board right away.
And for Tom there was an option to go Raise Dead Flame and Flesh Giant immediately. Tom was taking the card draw there, probably setting up for a bigger swing turn, and that Broom absolutely unlocks it for the next turn. He'll be taking a ton of damage in the meantime, but if he can get down double Flesh Giant and rush them out, that could be his ticket back into this game. This is not a problem-free philosophy.
I mean, yes, it is not. Very clap. Well done there, Gia. I would have liked to have seen it come down on the previous turn, I've got to be honest. Having two of them at 2/4s on this turn, it just felt like it would have been a little bit more consistent of a lockdown on the board, because he wasn't representing that much extra pressure. It wasn't like he was going to lose board control, I feel, because he didn't play a 1-3 on that turn.
It definitely feels like it's a bit stuck now, but at the very least, Shaxy has the strong follow-up of the Soul Shard Lapidary going into the next turn. It's just a problem of how he wants to take these trades. I feel like Shaxy should start prioritizing just putting Tom down to as low a health total as possible. I love this. Committing a Twin Slice already just because of the mana already spoken for next turn.
That's right. He's the aggressor. Let's get this damage in, making it so the Panthera is a little bit harder to kill, which on average I think is correct. He kind of has to have the broomstick for there to be any real chance of Tom actively clearing this board.
And in order to get those Flesh Giants down, Tom needs to take even more damage. She doesn't want to do... He's reaching for this Expired Merchant to give him... I'm not even sure with the amount of mana he has remaining what he can do, because if it's Dark Glare and with 2 Raised Deads used, ending the turn with Dark Glare would mean no more mana left.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking if he might go for the Voidwalker first, then play the Expired Merchant just to try and have more hand space, get something guaranteed for Broomstick.
In the end, I do think he has to go for this, just get the Flesh Giant down. He can clear the board, but he is so close to dying. He's not setting up lethal on the other end.
Very, very big trouble for Shaxy. Soul Shard Lapidary is obviously what I'm looking at most heavily on this turn. But he does need to bear in mind that he has no way in hand to deal with a taunt. So a single Voidwalker, were it to be in Tom's hand, which he knows that he has the ability to dig for with more expired merchants, very likely, could put a big road bump in his game plan.
Yes, that is very true. And that's why we see Shaxy here considering maybe Philosophy, Satyr, Overseer, and then just putting down 2 minions on board and trading into, I'd have to imagine, the Flame Imp. And so
Right.
that 1/3 cannot deal with either of the minions on board. He's seen a Broomstick used already.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a pretty good chance that he'd manage to with the minion approach. We are caster visioning that the Voidwalker is in hand though. And I suppose Soul Fire is a threat to get rid of minions.
It's really only taunts that I would be afraid of here at all for Shaxy, but weirdly enough, if it is there, this gets a bit scary for Shaxy all of a sudden. Another giant coming down is a lot of pressure.
Really does. Oh,
Whoa, and
Soul
both
Fragments.
of the Soul
drawn.
Fragments.
Oh my goodness. He can play 2
Double
taunts.
giant. What?
Tom just sets up counter lethal.
Whoa!
What is this? No Dark Glares involved.
Trade away the 1/3, make board space, get down the second Voidwalker. Oh my god.
Trade away the Flesh Giant as well, but you know what? It's fine to miss 8 if you're threatening over 24 anyway. No board space for Shaxy to do any Magtheridon shenanigans.
Well, it's the aggro version. He doesn't have Magtheridon.
Oh, he doesn't. Right.
He's got nothing.
He is just altruist, potentially, from Tom's perspective. That could have been scary here, but even then, it's not dealing with 2 of those 8/8s.
Oh.
Tom is nodding to himself. He knows he has this in the bag.
24, 27. Even if he was to kill off the Voidwalker and heal back up to full, it's still exactly 30 damage on board?
What I'm seeing... That was crazy.
What a way for Tom to end up our champion for the first day. It heads through to the semi-finals, and he made it look easy, I've got to say. This Zoo deck is looking really good for him so far. I like a lot of what I'm seeing.
It looked very scary there at the end, and while we were testing Zoo, we thought, this deck is inconsistent. If you don't Dark Lair, doesn't do anything. Tom deliberately tossed away his Dark Lair there. He took many turns digging with the expired merchants when I wanted to cop out and just play a Flesh Giant for 4 or 5 mana and call it a turn. But what clearly won Tom the game there was holding out until he could play everything at once. It was, of course, fortunate to have drawn into both of the taunts by that moment, but Tom was playing towards that. He prioritized card draw even as he was taking every single bit of damage there, and at the very last moment, pulled it back 1 turn to swing it all.
It was a gorgeous line. We always just get glimpses of Tom, even amongst our doubt at some of his lines, of how great he truly is as a Hearthstone player. One of the all-times, obviously being a former world champion, but just week after week in GM, we see these glimmers of greatness, which I absolutely love to watch as he, as I said, sails through to the semi-finals to be played out on Sunday. The rest of the day here in APAC with our remaining 2 games is going to be finding out who is joining him. It should be a great set of matches because everyone is still live. Tiz and Flurry, I believe, will be our next match to be fighting out who gets to face Shaxy. And we've seen some ups, we've seen some downs, but it has been exciting Hearthstone non-stop